Hi, I'm Reverend Jake Sabe, and welcome to Children's Bible Stories. Alright children, our Bible story for today is going to be the story of John the Baptist prepares the way. So John the Baptist was the cousin of Jesus, the son of the priest Zachariah and his wife Elizabeth. They'd given birth to him in their old age. And now John came out of the wilderness baptizing people. And St. Luke in his gospel actually gives us a date for this. He said this took place in the 15th year of Caesar Tiberius. Now we know from historical records that Caesar Tiberius took the throne around 1415 AD. Therefore, if this was the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar's reign, this would mean that John the Baptist came preaching and teaching in the year 30 AD. Which means that the scholars who argue that Jesus was born in 1 AD is accurate. Now, all four Gospels mention John the Baptist and his ministry. And so John came out preaching, teaching, and baptizing. And the text also tells us that he wore clothes made out of camel's hair and had a belt of leather around his waist, and that he lived out in the wilderness eating nothing but locusts and wild honey. And then John came to the Jordan River baptizing people. And the Gospels tell us that this was to fulfill what was prophesied by the prophet Isaiah, who said that the Lord would send ahead of the Messiah the voice of one crying in the wilderness, who would prepare the way of the Lord and make his paths straight. And so John the Baptist came before Jesus to prepare the way, to get the people ready for the coming of Jesus. Now, the four Gospels each tell us little bits about what John did. So Luke mentions that people came out to John to be baptized, and he called them a brood of vipers. However, Matthew is more specific, saying that it was the Pharisees and Sadducees that came to John the Baptist to be baptized. And when they came, he said, "You brood of vipers, who told you to flee from the wrath of God which is to come?" And what John meant by this is that the Pharisees and Sadducees were hypocrites. They inwardly were not faithful, but outwardly pretended as if they were true believers. So outwardly, they behaved like very good people, but inwardly, they didn't actually trust in God to save them. And so when they came to be baptized, they were just coming to be baptized as some sort of a good work. They weren't coming to be baptized for the forgiveness of their sins. They weren't coming to be baptized because they were actually seeking salvation. They were coming to be baptized because they wanted to make a show of it. And so John says, "You brood of vipers," as in, you guys aren't really Christians, you're snakes. And God's wrath is coming upon you. So how dare you come and try and use this sacrament of baptism to try and hide from God? God's going to get you. He then says that the axe is ready at the tree, meaning that God's judgment is coming, that the Jewish tree is going to be cut down, that those Jews who think they can be saved just because of their Jewishness and not by faith, John is warning them that God's going to come down and cut down the tree of Israel. And this is where John also tells them, he says to the Pharisees and Sadducees, he says, "You Pharisees and Sadducees, you think you're saved just because you're children of Abraham? I tell you that if God wanted to, he could take these rocks here and turn them into children of Abraham." In other words, John was saying, you Pharisees and Sadducees think you're going to heaven just because you're Jewish. But you won't be saved by the Jewish race. You'll be saved by your faith in God. As we teach, we are saved by grace, not by our race. And so it doesn't matter if you're a Jew, you can't get to heaven unless you have faith. And so John was condemning the Pharisees and Sadducees who thought they could get to heaven just because they're Jewish. He says, no, you won't be saved because of your Jewish ethnicity. You have to believe in God. And now the axe is ready at the tree. Jesus is come. The Messiah has come. He's going to chop down this nation of Israel. And any Jew that doesn't believe, he's going to be chopped down with the tree. Only the Jews who have faith will be saved. Now Luke's gospel tells us that John wasn't just baptizing people, he was also preaching and teaching. And so crowds were coming to him and saying, John, what should we do? And he says, everyone who has 2 tunics, take it and give it to him who has none. All of you who have food, take it and give it to those who are hungry. In other words, John's saying, look, what you should do now that you have been baptized, now that you are saved, go out and live out fruits of repentance. He says, now that you are a Christian, now that you are saved, go and live the Christian life. Help the poor, care for those who have none. And then tax collectors came to John and said, what shall we do? And he said, just take what you're meant to take. Don't take more money than you're meant to take. And soldiers came to John and said, what should we do? And he said, just be content with your wages and don't extort people. So in other words, John didn't say to the tax collectors, stop being tax collectors. He didn't say to the soldiers, stop being soldiers. He said, just live out your vocation rightfully. Don't sin in your vocation. Do the right thing. Only take the money that you're meant to take and don't go abusing your vocation. And Luke's gospel tells us that while John was preaching and teaching, he also spoke out against the actions of Herod Antipas. For Herod Antipas had taken the wife, Herodotus, from his brother Herod Philip. And so John spoke out against him, and this made Herod very angry, and he would go on later to arrest John the Baptist, as we read elsewhere in the Gospels. And John's gospel tells us that while John was out there preaching and teaching, the priests and the Levites came to John and said, who are you? And he confessed, I'm not the Christ. I'm not the Messiah. I'm not the one who was sent by God to come and be the Messiah and to save you from your sins. And they said, well then who are you? Are you Elijah? Are you the prophet? And John simply answered, I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness to make straight the path of the Lord. And you see, later in the Gospels, Jesus will testify that John is the one who was to come in the spirit of Elijah. That John is the one who would fulfill the promise that God predicted that someone would come in the spirit of Elijah to take Elijah's place. And Jesus testifies that that was John. But John himself was very humble. He didn't go around saying, yes, I'm Elijah. I'm the one who fulfills this prophecy. I'm the one who's come in the spirit of Elijah. When he was asked, are you the one who comes in the spirit of Elijah? John was humble and simply said, I'm just the one who's the voice in the wilderness that the prophet Isaiah spoke about. And so even though John was the one who came in the spirit of Elijah, he was very humble and simply said, look, I'm the one who's come to prepare the way for the Lord. I'm not the Messiah is coming. And so in our next video, children, we're going to discuss how the Messiah showed up and was baptized by John. But that's in our next video. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.